Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
Part of what is needed, of course, is to be able to handle situations without some sort of crutch, to be able to deal with the pain, the anxiety that's involved in life as a whole.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Norman Gadan, who is the head of the Counseling Center at the University of Toledo. Father Bacik and Mr. Gadan will discuss college and the family, dealing with crisis. And now, here is Father Bacik.
Norm, one of the reasons that I enjoy speaking with you is that we have similar interests. We work at a university, very interested in college students and trying to help their performance during the college years. One of the things I suppose we've learned over the years is the importance of the family for college students. Parents often play a more important role than they even recognize. Students, after all, have gotten their fundamental values within the family. They've probably developed their own outlook on higher education in large measure by interaction with their parents. Some of the parents will be people who went to college and are just insistent that their offspring do the same. Other parents have never been to college and want their students to go. So that they're just extremely important in all of this. And one of the things I suppose is that we've noticed over the years is that it's hard to give advice to parents. It's hard to know exactly what to tell them. I get calls from parents often in terms of religious matters. My son or daughter is dropping out of the church or joining some other religious group. But there's a certain anxiety that exists with parents, and we really need something to guide them, to help them. And I have just discovered recently a very important help along this line. It's a book, as a matter of fact, and the book is entitled Parenting Through the College Years.
It sounds like a very good book.
Well, it is, and as a matter of fact. As I'm looking here, it is written by Norman Gadan and Sally Valongo.
Oh, she is an excellent writer. She's a Blade feature writer and reporter and Sunday supplement writer, has published in magazines, an excellent writer, and a college parent in her own right.
And I think the book is extremely helpful, and I want to draw on it a little bit and to talk about particular problems. And I want to zero in on really more the crisis side of things. Now, you can look at this a lot of angles. You've got sort of minor depression questions that parents have to help students with. You got common sense questions like staying in class and don't drop out too soon. You know, you've got the problem of dealing with the youngster when they come home from school or while they're living at home while they're going off to college, and the changes at that age and the new environment. And so there's all kind of problems that you've got as a parent
within a normal range.
Society. Yeah,
the ones you're talking
about
be
handled.
Are the 80% of the sort of normal problems, kids that do not have a serious identity crisis, do not develop psychiatric symptoms, and so on. And
but now there's a whole other set of things that I want to talk about at this time.
You don't have in mind things like eating disorders and drugs and alcohol and things like that.
Precisely. Why don't you tell me a little bit about some of that?
Well, I again don't want to emphasize this too much to parents or try and scare them too much, but our feeling is to have just some rudimentary knowledge and information about it's important. I'd rather focus tonight on maybe some of the drug and alcohol issues, but just in passing, the eating disorders are becoming increasingly common. We know a little bit more about them and how to treat them. The most common and well-known is called anorexia nervosa. And here a parent would look for a large weight loss over a short period of time in their kids, unusual eating habits, social isolation, extreme physical activity. Anorexics often combine harsh diets with very strenuous exercise programs. Often there's growth of hair on legs and arms, or one or the other. And there's often cessation of menstruation. It simply stops for a while. Bulimia comes from a Greek word, and it describes a mountainous hunger. Symptoms here include depression, changes in appearance, which might be skin rashes or changes in skin quality, swollen glands, abnormal interest in food, and this can often be associated with tooth and gum deterioration. This is the so-called binge-purge cycle. These are things to be concerned with. They have psychological ramifications, and they can be very harmful to the body. In the case of anorexia, it can lead to death. But I think alcohol and drugs is probably what we ought to focus on tonight.
Just before you go on, there was a time in the recent past, it seemed to me, when we thought that about 1/5 of the females on campus had these kinds of anorexic problems or bulimic problems. I've read some things more recently that suggest that maybe we were in a little bit of an overreaction on that, and that maybe somehow the way the questions were asked and the studies were done were not all that accurate, and the eating disorders are not as great as we might think.
It has been hard to get accurate data. There are differences in the way some people have defined each of these two things I just mentioned. And if you ask students, the surveys we do sometimes result in people sort of bragging, oh yeah, I'm part of the binge purge group, whereas really they've only done this once or twice. On the other hand, with anorexia, students are often likely to minimize it or to actually deny it and to sort of hide out, and we may have a bit of an underestimate on anorexia and a substantial overestimate in college students on bulimia. Nonetheless, even if we're off a bit on the numbers, if any parents sense that there's something like this going on, it would be very good to talk directly with their kids about it, to seek information and to seek help.
That's the really important point. Yeah, whatever the statistics are,
Right.
the question for any particular parent or person concerned about a college student is how are they doing, and do they have a particular problem? But I think you're also right in saying that maybe larger problems have to do with the alcohol and the drug abuse. So why don't we
much
turn
more widespread
attention-
at the University of Toledo and at most universities I know of today. The major drug problem seems to be alcohol. And one of the questions is, how can you tell if somebody has a drug or alcohol problem? I could throw out a few ideas on this from our experience, if you like, and we could discuss it. It's so important to us because it often is associated also with our discipline problems. Typical situation, somebody gets drunk, destroys property in the dorm. Somebody gets drunk, smashes up a car. Somebody gets drunk and unfortunately maybe date rape results from it. So it's an important issue and a pretty widespread one on campus.
Do you have any statistics on that? Do we have any idea of what percentage of college students are alcoholics or...
I'm sure there are on it. I don't happen to have them on the tip of my tongue here tonight, but I'm sure they exist, and the impression I would have from most college physicians, college psychiatrists, and general impression is that it's a growing statistic. More and more students are hooked on alcohol in one form or another. Increasingly, it's associated with other campus problems and serious discipline infractions and with accidents and accidental deaths.
And it's also connected, no doubt, with family history. We're learning more about that, so that alcoholic parents have to be extremely watchful in relationship to their offspring.
Family influence, and of course there are theories of genetic, direct genetic influence too. So whether it's the familial environment or the gene pool that you inherit, one way or another, the family's probably involved in drug and alcohol abuse as intimately as with anything students experience. Does the student go to school intoxicated? Do they miss school because of drinking? Do they drink while at school? Has your son or daughter been arrested for drinking while intoxicated? Has there been a serious injury in a car accident or some other accident as a result of drugs or drinking? Are your kids hard to get along with while they've been drinking? Do they keep a secret supply? Do they have to have a warm-up drink before going to a social event or to a class or to give a speech? Has the family physician expressed some concern over drinking, or has the family minister or priest expressed concern to the parents? Do they regularly use some kind of drink or pills or something, or at one time or another? Or do they kind of specially use drugs and alcohol as part of a specific experience, social experience?
What you'd be trying to do in this is to give some hints to parents to be looking at, or anyone. I suppose also can be used as sort of a self-examination if one wanted to use it that way, of saying, do I exhibit some of this behavior? And the one that jumped out at me, Norm, when you were talking, is the idea of needing a drink before one went into a given stressful situation. That's always, if we're moving away from just a genetic analysis to a psychological one, that would seem important to me. I mean, in terms of what we're going to do about it. Part of what is needed, of course, is to be able to handle situations without some sort of crutch, to be able to deal with the pain, the anxiety that's involved in life as a whole, rather than, moving in this direction of needing the drink ahead of time. So,
kind of raises the question why people are doing it.
Yeah, and if that really was their problem, then, what we would try to do is help people develop more social skills, help them to get in touch with their negative emotions, teach them that it's all right to be anxious and that there's ways of getting
find other ways to cope
it.
with anxiety.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Could I mention some of the other, sort of commonly accepted reasons or motives for this kind of alcohol abuse?
Okay, we're on alcoholism. Okay, go ahead.
Or drug abuse. And one of them is the first which you're identifying here, which is to sort of help handle tension or anxiety.
Yes,
Another is to fit in with other people, with their peers. Some students require instant gratification.
I think that fitting in with the peers goes a lot with like smoking marijuana or something. Right. That if one is in that kind of grouping and your joint is being passed around, that
it's easier to say yes than to say no.
And it evidently bothers the other people in the group if you don't smoke in that kind of situation.
Other people, I think, or students especially, are trying to show their parents and the rest of us in the adult world that they're grown up and that they can smoke, they can drink, they can do these things, and they're sort of saying, in a sense, look, I'm an adult. Others are sort of getting back or rebelling at their parents who may have had very strict rules about drinking or drugs while they lived at home. Others, I think, are like most of us. They think the really serious or dangerous consequences of alcohol abuse are for the other person. It'll never hit them.
Won't happen to me.
Won't happen to me. And others, just as a way of kind of coping with the world, feel guilty in a very general and unfocused way, and it may be a reaction to very strict parental discipline or to excessive criticism, and they do it, and they just kind of feel guilty, and then they have a drink, and they feel okay, and then they feel guilty, and you get this kind of repetitive cycle. Just some of the kind of general reasons.
Let me pick up one that has been on my mind lately, and that is taken really from Rollo May's book now, which is quite goes back to the early 70s, Power and Innocence. I don't know if you remember it or not, but
I haven't read all his books.
But one of the points was that of powerlessness in our culture, that when people feel powerless in any given situation, they need to try to assert themselves, and then they become more aggressively assertive, and then at that point, if they still can't make it or make their mark or get recognition or self-esteem, that violence may well occur. Now, that violence might go outward towards burning something up or punching somebody out, but the violence also can be turned within. In other words, I'm going to be violent at myself because I'm so powerless, because I can't do anything. Now, when I heard that analysis or reread that book recently, I thought to myself, aha, the drug problem. One of the things, it's always been hard for me to understand, why people would almost destroy themselves in this way. And it strikes me that one possibility, and one I think that is operative in a certain percentage of cases, is that it is really a violent act upon themselves. They do want to destroy themselves. They are hurting themselves because they are powerless, because there's no exit, as Sartre said. There's no way out, no way to handle the anxieties of life. And I might throw that into the mix here of reasons why people end up getting involved in drugs. Now, how much that relates to the college scene would be interesting to see, because, as we know, universities are complex bureaucracies from one viewpoint, and often it is possible to feel, as Max Weber said, that we're in the iron cage, or that we are powerless in this large bureaucratic world. Can't make the professors do what one wants, or gets the courses one, or stands in line, and all of this. And it's possible that that could be one of the causes that's thrown back into this mix of why people are doing drugs or maybe excessive alcohol.
I think that's a good possibility. And I was thinking as you were talking that students tend to, most of their coping skills tend to be active ones. as opposed to passive, tend to focus on solving problems, accomplishing goals, finishing tasks, meeting deadlines, and there's a certain limit to how much of the world each of us can predict and control and understand. And when you reach the limits of your own predictability and control, it's easier, I think, at that point to turn to palliatives, to turn to some inner experience, which can be either healthy and spiritual and uplifting, maybe kind of oceanic, or to turn to something which you're calling sort of an internal violence, or a violence against yourself, which would be drugs or drink or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think it's sort of a growing or a cumulative phenomena. When students I've worked with and talked with about this didn't start out to become alcoholics who beat up their girlfriend and destroyed their car. They took a few drinks, they saw it in their family, it felt good to them, they thought they could handle it. One thing leads to another, and they're into, I think what you're talking about here, both a violence toward others at times and a violence toward the self. Parents may or may not have had the same kinds of experiences, and I think in many homes, kids are seeing exactly what they replicate on the college campus. They may see their father drink and abuse verbally or physically their mother or the other kids, and they see a lot of these things at home. Other students you see develop these patterns, and home was, it's kind of hard to figure it out.
It certainly is.
Home doesn't seem to be in any way different or unusual or unhealthy, and they've learned it, and it's been part of a peer group experience, and there's been a steady accretion of drug and alcohol.
Mm-hmm. I think very often the drug phenomenon appears to be more foreign to parents. In other words, many of the parents
till they look in their own medicine chest.
Would drink, yeah, but they would drink and understand that and say, yeah, I got smashed once myself or something, you know. But the drug phenomenon plays into the hands of this whole newness, this radical change in the culture. I mean, almost most of the parental generation you talk to now, you know, says, well, when I was growing up, it was so much easier. We didn't have the same temptations that other people have or that the young people today have. And I think that's a general perception in the parental generation. And it makes it all a bit more scary. And I think there would be parents who say, well, I know if my kid was drinking too much. I wouldn't have much doubt about that. But I wouldn't know if my youngster was on marijuana or not. Or I find it hard to know about this sort of thing. It's out of my familiar world.
Right. And we try to give parents some basic information about these things and to encourage them, if they suspect something, to talk forthrightly with their kids about it. Whether
well,
it's
why don't
late
you say
high school,
something about, you know, what are the signs of the drugs? No, I mean, how are we going to know about if they're on drugs or not? Or how are we going to decipher this thing? Are they all the same kind of things you were talking about with alcohol?
Many of the things would be many of the
distinctive?
signs would be similar to the alcohol. How they seem in terms of their behavior, attitudes toward classes, staying away from school, being secretive about what they're doing or where they're going. One common one that parents often know about and doesn't connect is large expenditures of money. I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and they said they were bringing their kid back home from the dorms at the college they were had been attending, and I said, how come? He said, well, he just ran out of money. And I said, well, how much did he spend? And he said, well, we can't figure it out. It was a couple of $1,000s extra beyond room and board and tuition. And I said,
that
how
puts
could they
the light on?
and I didn't say, do you suspect drugs? And they didn't say, we suspect drugs. That was kind of
well, I certainly have
but
dealt with parents, and that becomes my very direct comment in that situation. When you got a new money situation, you better look at this. You know, where's that money going?
So money, changes in attitude toward school, changes toward any other big changes in behavior, dramatic behavioral personality alterations, friends, family, employers, priests, ministers, rabbis, doctors, other people saying to your parents, you know, Jim seems a little different. Bob doesn't seem the same. Is Sally having a rough time with her boyfriend? She seems unusual. Be very attentive to the observations of people who know your kids well. When you visit campus, if you meet a faculty member or a dean or an administrator, talk to them about your students. Not in the sense that you're, conducting a secret inquiry, but you're interested in how other people perceive and react to them. And I'd ask questions directly.
Do you do much with the physical side? I mean, eyes and and all of that. Do you think parents
If
can tell much that way?
Well, I think if there's something quite overtly different that they notice about about skin tone, pallor, the way eyes look, tremors, eating, sleeping habits, I would raise the question whether it might be a depression or an illness or drug or alcohol. You often can't tell. And then there's another ingredient to it, which is the whole form parental communication has to take during the college years.
Okay, this is where we're going to start to talk a bit about how parents are going to cope with this and deal with these crisis situations.
Right. And first they've got to maybe alter, or at least many of us have to alter, how we communicate with our kids. We got to, well, obviously you just can't tell them what they ought to do like you could when they were 12 or 13 or 14 and expect them to do it and get away with it. You got to give less advice, less interpretation, less disagreement, and more simple listening, empathy, problem-solving skills, and whatever you can say or do to support the growth of the student and to facilitate them solving the problems and understanding themselves.
Okay, now let's stay with that for a while.
A lot of words by psychologists.
Well, but I mean, some really good ideas, it seems to me, in there. I mean, I get the picture of a lot of common sense in that, so that in the college years, parents have to remember that their students are growing up, that they are facing a new world. I think parents have to sense their limitations very often. I think if parents don't know the drug scene and haven't been through it, I mean, that needs to be said up front or admitted.
Exactly.
That
and they ought to try and inform themselves and learn about it if they suspect it's there and they don't know about it.
That's right, yeah.
Or call in other help.
Start out by saying, I'm limited, and I think that admitting that maybe to one's offspring as well is helpful, and maybe that can open up some dialogue on it, like, hey, I want to know what you're going through. I want, of course, there's a long history of this in a family. If you've had good communication, it's going to be easier to do.
Exactly.
But it seems to me it would be part of saying, well, I want to know your world. Tell me more about it. What's it like? And then what goes wrong at that point is if you jump all over them when they say, my roommate smokes pot regularly, and then you just blow a gasket at that point, well, then you're not going to get any place.
And it's so hard not to do.
Yeah, you're going to have to listen and swallow a bit and drink it in, and if you're ever going to get the picture of what's going on. So that seems to be an important part of what you were saying there. And then I think, too, that the parental generation needs to have a certain confidence that says, well, maybe we weren't on drugs, but we know anxiety as well as anybody else. We know depression. We know the pressure of exams or whatever else.
And they also know their own kids better than anybody else probably does, too.
So you want to build up the confidence of parents and say, you know things. And I think don't be afraid to say it. Sitting here like as a religious counselor, if students come into me, I mean, I'm usually not loath to say, well, think of this out of the tradition, or, we've learned this much. There's a collected wisdom that we have that you ought not neglect. It's not like you're the first person who's ever dealt with anxiety over a relationship. You're not the first person who ever had a relationship break up or whatever else it is. So let's look here at the religious tradition and see if there aren't things here that could help us.
And people had serious problems throughout history, and family members have been able to help long before psychologists were able to give labels to these various concepts and these types of helping. There's a special
So let's give the parents
situation.
confidence, right?
Let's give them confidence.
Let's tell them
and
that
then
they can do something.
And then let's look
about
at a crisis. Let's say you get a call in the middle of the night, and it has to do with alcohol. And either suddenly a son or daughter is going to confess to you a serious problem with it, or they're going to talk to you about having been caught drunk while driving, or they're going to tell you they got drunk and broke up the furniture in the dorm room, or something like that.
Okay, we got a crisis.
Okay, we've got some general tips. They probably won't be able to be remembered by your listening audience, but let me run through a couple just to give you a feel for it. First, we suggest that the parent use some of the skills we were talking about earlier, but in this case, try and circumscribe the problem as much as possible, to try and sort of define it, narrow it down. For example, it's a problem in drinking while driving, not drinking during all the college years and on all the things that can happen, and not kind of expand it into other possibilities. And to try and relate the emotional state that their kid might be in to just what's happened, and to help them kind of gain control over it in that way. If they've gotten drunk, driven while driving, and nobody's been hurt, they've simply been arrested or charged or gotten a ticket, That's one thing. If they've been in an accident, that's another. If they've been in an accident and fortunately no one's hurt, parents help them understand their emotional state and what's happened.
So let's not get carried away,
Right.
maybe, and think the problem is larger than it might be. Let's
Right.
find out really what it is, narrow it down.
Locate it in time and space.
If someone says they're pregnant, we've got to make sure that they've been to the doctor and they know
Exactly.
for sure that, in fact, they are
And
pregnant.
if you're talking about, let's say, alcohol abuse and drunken driving, then we don't want to bring pregnancy into it unnecessarily. Second, participate in the organization of the problem. Kind of what you were starting to do here. What can be changed? How can problems like this be handled? What are some potential solutions? Well, first of all, let's go with the drunken driving. Maybe you need a lawyer. Maybe you need a psychiatrist, a physician. What are the possible solutions here? Third, limit the duration of the whole discussion and focus on what the student can do and what they can learn and develop out of it. The kid may want to stay on the phone for 3-4 hours, and unless there has been some horrible consequence, generally that isn't going to serve anybody's purpose, to just go over it and over it and over it. If it's possible, set some kind of a time limit on working together. Maybe saying, look, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, let's talk for a half hour tonight, and we'll get back together at noon tomorrow and we'll work on it then.
Good advice.
Keep the student involved in the problem. Try not, tempted as you might be, to simply take over.
Mm.
You might be a parent, well-to-do, you know lawyers, you know physicians, you know how to handle these things. Let the student experience the problem, the consequences, and manage it as best he or she can. Help them build in some kind of a plan, some kind of a way to cope with it, to organize it, and then follow up with them.
So in this case, maybe we're going to have to get them into some sort of an alcohol program.
That's right. On our
Joining
campus, we have
AA.
AA. We also have Narcotics Anonymous. We make referrals for inpatient alcohol treatment if necessary. Might have to look at the family background, genetic history, and therapy treatment. Also, you may need an attorney.
Norm, that is very practical advice. We've been trying to talk about the parents of college students and the kind of crises that might arise. We've looked at eating disorders and talked about alcoholism and drugs, which scare parents no end these days. And you've made some good suggestions about keeping it in perspective and defining the problem and then helping them to work out some solutions themselves without jumping in and solving it all on your own. Norm, I want to thank you very much for sharing that material with us.
You've been listening to Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik talked with Mr. Norman Gadan, who is the head of the Counseling Center at the University of Toledo. The topic of this week's Reflections was College and the Family, Dealing with Crisis. If you have any comments on today's show or suggestions for future programs, please write Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Ministry, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio, 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Commission of the Diocese of Toledo.